Good evening. Today is Thursday, October 3rd, 2019, and I'll call this Board of Education work session meeting to order. Mrs. Lane, will you call the roll, please?
Mr. Begley?
Here.
Mr. Birding?
Present.
Mrs. Gundrum?
Here.
Mrs. O'Neill? Mrs. Shorter?
Here.
Mr. Bakley, will you lead us in the pledge, please?
Yes, sir. I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you, Mr. Bagley. First item on the agenda is presentations and resolutions. Mr. Smith?
Yes, Mr. Birding and members of the board, we do have 3 presentations scheduled this evening. Our first presentation is in regard to school funding. At this time, I'll turn it over to Mrs. Lane.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Good evening. As many of you know, our state education funding can be a little challenging from time to time. Tonight, I wanted just to give you an update as far as what our funding is hopefully going to be for this year and next year, and then we'll look into the crystal ball to see what happens for the future. Many of you may, I know, have heard me in the past say that our funding formula is broken. It's supposed to be based on student enrollment and property wealth of a school district. But unfortunately, the state does not have enough money when they use those parameters to calculate funding for all school districts. So they have put some methods in place to stay within their appropriations and still try to give districts enough money to operate with. So we have a couple of, you may have heard in the past saying, oh, we're going to be on the guarantee, we're on the cap. And tonight I just want to explain a little bit about Fairfield and what that means for us. We are what they call a capped district, so our funding is limited. In the last several years, we have been able to gain some additional funding because they have allowed growth of the cap. This year, they have frozen everything. So what we received last year is what we're going to receive this year. There is no growth to the cap. The good news is that we should receive some additional funding this year from some other categories that they have awarded. So as I said, we are frozen in our base funding, which is about a little over $33 million for this year and next year. But we will receive some additional funds through what they're calling the student wellness dollars. And I know Mrs. Shorter had mentioned that to us in a previous board meeting, so thank you. I will expand on that now to tell you how we're going to get some additional funds. So there's 3 categories. There's student wellness, supplemental student wellness, and enrollment growth aid. And there's calculations for each of those categories. For us, student wellness aid is the biggest piece that we will receive, and that's based on the number of students we educate here in Fairfield. So basically, when you walk into a classroom, all those eyes that look at you, they have to be in our actual buildings for us to receive money, for this type of money for this year and next year. They also took some information from the U.S. Census Bureau's American Community Survey. Again, that's a survey. So the data could be maybe a little misleading, but they come up with the percentage of students that are under the age of 18 living at home with incomes below 185% of the federal poverty rate. Mr. Birding had a good question, as I sent this out a little earlier to our board. What is that? What is the poverty rate? So 185% of the poverty rate, I believe for this year, is a little over $22,000 per household. So they use that information, they divide it into quintiles, and of course quintile 1 is the highest rate of poverty, and that you can read the numbers up there, $250 per student for this year, $360 per student for next year. Then you have quintiles 2 through 5, and that's a sliding scale. And as you can see, Fairfield falls into quintile number 4 with what they calculated a poverty rate of 25.3%. So what does that mean in dollars for us? For this year, it's about $75.64 per student, for a total of a little over $683,000. Next year, they allow it to grow a little bit, so we'll have $961,000 that we're expecting. But there are some strings attached to that money on how we can spend it and what we can spend it on. So I'll get to that in just a minute. The second piece of the student wellness aid is supplemental wellness aid, where you must have 10% of your property in agricultural value, which for us, as many of you know, we're running out of land. So we do not qualify for this piece of the funding because our current agricultural value is less than 0.5%. The third piece of the funding is the one that really hasn't been talked about quite so much, and that has to do with enrollment growth. And most of you know that our enrollment has been pretty steady for the last several years. So I'll be honest with you, I was a little surprised that we're going to receive, I think, some additional funding for this piece. And that's based on growth and average growth over the last several years. So if I did the calculations correctly, it looks like we may receive another almost $83,000 this year, and then maybe $124,000 more next year. But I'll put the disclaimer in there. I still need more information from the state, which hasn't been released yet, to make sure that we will receive that funding. So what are the rules for spending this money? We must develop a plan, and we must communicate that in coordination with a community partner. Many of you know we partner with the Butler County Educational Service Center for all different kinds of services. So we are planning to partner with them in developing our plan. The initiatives that you can spend the money on are listed, some of those being programs that we already offer or services we already offer in our schools. So they are saying the money can be used on current expenses. So if we, for instance, community liaisons, we partner with the Butler County Educational Service Center to provide those to the district. It comes out of our general fund. Well, we could use the wellness funds to cover that expense, at least for 2 years, and then go back to general fund if we don't receive any additional funds the third year. We could possibly expand some. If we wanted to add a community liaison, we could possibly use the money for that. So we have a lot of things to discuss. Like I said, we're in the process of developing that plan. We will share that with the board once that is finalized. And then there's rules about how we have to account for that additional money. Number one, it has to be in a separate fund, and it will not appear on the 5-year forecast. So when I present that to you in November, that money will not be included in the forecast. Depending on what our plan ends up to be, it actually, forecast may look a little better because maybe we're using some of that money to replace some expenses that we currently have now. So like I said, I'll explain more of that when we actually present the plan and the forecast. But we will receive money this month, half of it this month, half of it in February. And we're allowed to carry it over any money that's not spent, so that could mean we may have 3 or 4 years where we have some, if we don't use all this money, we can carry it over. I have a feeling we may use it all because we have plenty of programs that we can probably use it for or expand. ODE is currently developing a template for us for an annual reporting. They don't have to approve the plan itself, but they do want to see what we spent the money on. So that they are developing that right now. So one word of caution that I have heard in the last several meetings I've had with other treasurers is, if you take those expenses out of the 5-year forecast, it makes it look a little better. But then what happens in 2 years? If we want to continue the plan, let's say if we've expanded a program, then the general fund's going to have to pick up those expenses probably. Since we're already in deficit spending, possibly starting this year, next year, what do we do? Do we say, yes, that's an important piece, we need to continue it? Or maybe the Iowa Department of Education will continue to fund And the state will continue to fund those programs for us, and it won't be an issue. But it is something we have to keep in mind. I have to keep in mind when I produce that forecast. If I take expenses out of things we're currently doing, that I need to make sure I put those back in. Because right now in law, we don't have that money after the 2 years. So just something to think about. And then, just for the future, we are still looking at possibly a new funding formula. The Cup-Patterson funding plan is still out there. People are still working on that. Don't know if that's going to help us all that much, but it depends on what comes of that. And then also whether or not they'll continue with the student wellness aid for the future. It's been said that once they fund something, they don't tend to take it away. But there may be other strings attached to it if they continue that. So that's my crystal ball, and hopefully it'll tell me what I can predict for the future, but so far it hasn't helped. So I'll take any questions from the board.
Any questions for Mrs. Lane?
Do you know how often the Census Bureau's survey is updated? Is that, I've not heard of it before, so is that something done yearly, or is that just every 10 years and we're operating off the 2010 numbers?
This isn't even the Census Bureau.
Okay.
It was, and everybody says, what is, I mean, it is the Census Bureau, but it's a survey. It's, what I believe to say is, well, how many children do you have in your home? There's nobody actually going and verifying that information. So as far as I know, there was actually somebody that came in to a county up north last week or two for the next census. So it's starting to happen, I think, but not so sure that that's the same data that they're using to calculate this.
Okay, thank you.
I was going to address some of these items as it pertains to student wellness in my report, but I'll just mention it now because I think it ties in. So the Ohio House of Representatives just passed a bill. It was like 85-7, and this is in regards to student safety and suicides. So they're wanting to increase the focus on the issue, which of course is very important, but there are a number of mandates, reporting that they are basically wanting to impose on districts.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm starting to think that the money that they're giving us, it's gonna be a sleight of hand thing. They're giving it to us, and then they're gonna start imposing criteria. So I don't know if we're going to be able to.
Well, my question would be, are they really going to give us money to help fund these mandates that they may pose on us?
Yeah.
That's always the
That's the
question.
question.
Unfunded mandates have been
Yep.
coming, for years. And hopefully not.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm optimistic. Like I said, the Cup-Patterson group has a lot of my colleagues on that group, and hopefully maybe that'll have an influence on funding for schools,
Yep.
more so than it has in the past.
Yep. It just feels like it's one of the old things that they've done
Shell game.
before.
Mhm.
Yeah. Because there's a lot. I mean, as I go through some of these, and this was in the Journal News, and it's basically the bill addresses school safety and youth suicides. It sounds like there's a lot of mandates coming.
And it still has to go through the Senate.
It has to
correct?
go through the Senate, of course, but I think it'll make it to the Senate at least. And, of course, I think it will get scaled down a little bit, but there's a lot. So, here we go.
Any other questions? I just have one quick question. When you're talking about the percentage of students under 18 living at home, the survey, and we get a per pupil amount, that's for all of our pupils, correct? Not just the ones that fall into that poverty?
Correct.
Okay,
That's correct.
all right.
So if you do the calculation, it's about 9,032 students.
Okay.
But people will say, but you have 10,000 students in your district. Well, that's basically probably an average daily membership on average, and the children have to be in the seats for it to
Right.
count. So there's a lot of times where we educate students maybe at other agencies that are not counted in that number. But there are students.
Okay. So it's like a daily reporting?
And then they take an average of
Right.
that.
Wow. Okay, well, thank you very much.
you.
Appreciate it. Mr. Smith, next item?
Yeah, our next presentation is parent survey. At this time, I'll turn it over to Mrs. Gina Gentry-Fletcher.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Members of the board, thank you for allowing me to talk tonight. Time to talk about a survey. Need to find out what our community, what they're thinking and what their feedback can be to make us a better district. So I'm going to just take you through here. Is it just a, she turned it on? There we go. I broke it. Thank you for your patience. About a week or so ago, I sent you a draft of a survey that we would like to send out to the community. I want to kind of preface this with saying that it is a long survey, but that's because it is a comprehensive survey. We are trying to gauge the community's thoughts on all of our district departments, services that we provide, communications, that sort of thing. So the first question is, why do we conduct a survey? We want to engage our community. We want to get honest feedback from our community. We want to learn the needs of the students that we serve. And we need to be able to assess the work that we're doing. The survey is scheduled to take place October 11th, and it'll run for a week until October 18th. We're going to distribute the survey electronically, but we will make copies available to those who do not have immediate access to a computer. We're going to post links all over the place, all over our Facebook page, Twitter, Instagram. I'm going to send out a notice on our district app. It'll be on our website. It'll be on the high school's website, parent email announcements, any kind of communication tool that we're sending out. We'll make sure that that link is out there. And as I said before, we are going to distribute paper copies if necessary in each of the buildings, including in district office. So some of the survey topics that we are going to be talking about, we're going to be looking at communication, staff, academics, transportation, special services, facilities, and that includes buildings, grounds, maintenance, and technology, financial stewardship, student services, and how are our parents and community members being engaged with our schools. And then this will just take you through some of the sample questions that we're going to be asking. And I'm not going to read all of this, but basically we'll have questions such as, how would you rate the following staff in the Fairfield City School District? And then there are several options and capabilities for anyone who's participating to actually write in their comments. Another question is, overall, I am satisfied with the opportunities for students, the programs, and facilities in the Fairfield City School District. And it gives those choices. And again, comments, personal comments to add. And here are a few more. And those are in your packet. And a few more. There's one that touches on transportation. How satisfied are you with your child's bus service? It asks questions about the bus driver. Is your bus driver courteous? That sort of thing. And then looking at the needs of students with disabilities and their families, which is kind of touches on an expansion of our equity plan to include students with disabilities. And then following this, the next steps will be to promote the survey, how the public can access it prior to the October 11th launch. If you all don't have any additions or questions or changes, then we'll go ahead and just get it prepared in SurveyMonkey. We'll continue to monitor and promote the participation throughout the length of the survey. I can go in and look to see how much participation we've had. And if it looks like it's kind of slumping, we can go in and just start promoting it again. So we'll excuse me. I want to go to the zoo this weekend, so I said we'll review the results the week of October 21st. And then following that analysis and review and putting together some sort of a report, I'll share those results with you guys and with the public. Questions, comments, changes?
Questions?
How did you come to determine that 1 week was long enough for the survey, from the 11th to the 18th?
One of the things I forgot to mention earlier was once we drafted the questions, I looked at other school districts to see what kind of surveys they produced for their communities, shared them with the team, the administrative team, and then met with Paul Fallon, who is considered an expert in everything surveys. And so I talked with him, he looked at our questions, he looked at the responses, he gave me some tweaks, some suggestions on the responses that we should make available. And then we took it from there. So that's how we got those. Would that answer your question?
So the assumption is they're either engaged or they're not, and 1 week's plenty of time for someone who's interested in participating.
Yes. He said that if we take it out too long, people will, I'll do it later. I'll do it later. And then the time will have passed and we won't be able to do it.
Creates emergency?
Yeah.
Okay.
Any other questions?
Well, I just had a comment. I think it's a great idea. I think it's good to gauge this type of sentiment from the community. This is always a good thing.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Mrs. Gunner, you have a question?
I didn't see it on here. I was wondering if it would be beneficial to ask the question of how many children are in the district. The person that's answering the survey,
How many children they
yeah,
have in the
or
district?
have they had in the district?
Okay.
I have a couple questions.
Sure.
So is there a way that we will limit them to respond just once, or they can respond multiple times? They can take the survey multiple times? Will that skew the numbers at all?
No, we will be able to do it according to
Like IP address?
an IP address,
Okay.
yeah.
The other question I have is there a goal for the number of responses that you would like to see to make the numbers valid?
That's a good question. In talking with other school districts, participation, if you are in a large district, you would like to have 25% at least
Yeah, that's great.
respond. So you figure a district with 10,000 students, 25%, 20 to 25%.
Okay.
So,
I think that's a great goal to have. And then the other question I have is that once it's shared with the board, then what do we do? Are you going to, if there's like red flags, you're going to discuss that with the leadership team and they'll have
Yes.
something to bring back to the board? Or
Mhm.
Okay,
yeah.
that's great. I think this is a great idea. I truly do. Because we really never know if our community is engaged.
Right.
And so I think this is a great opportunity to find that out. So-
And I will say that this was kind of brought to our attention, suggested by a parent in the district, someone who's very active in a lot of our community, in a lot of our committees, Mr. Lawrence Jones. So he's got some great insight about things that we can do. So it's always nice to be able to tap a person who's involved in our district to know some things that we could do to kind of gauge what the community's thinking, so.
Great. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Looking forward to seeing the results.
Keeping me busy.
Okay, Mr. Smith?
Our final presentation this evening is related to our state report card. At this time, I'll turn it over to Ms. Sullivan.
Thank you, Mr. Smith, Mr. Birding, and the board for having Mrs. Thompson and me here tonight to present. Unfortunately, Mrs. Pospischel is under the weather, so she's not able to be with us tonight. First, I thought it would be good for me to take you through some of the handouts that I sent you via email, but tonight are in your board packet, just to give you a quick overview. So really what you have here is a lot of data in different ways. So it's a lot of the same stuff, but you have, first of all, your packet, and this has the district report card on top, but then all of the individual building report cards behind it. Of course, tonight's presentation is very much a district overview, but there's so much more behind these numbers. So I don't want to overwhelm you, but I do want you to have what you might be interested in. Same thing with this handout here. On the front, it's a comparison of our similar districts, just a way to look at that. And then, of course, on the back, we have Fairfield as compared to the GMC. And then we also did an individual building breakdown by component for you as well. And then Mrs. Pospischel provided this comparison document for us, so we can look back to see how the district did in 2018 versus how we did on this past report card in 2019. So I think there are some interesting things to look at in there. We won't talk a lot about this tonight, but of course, if you have any questions regarding that, we can follow up with that. And then finally, I did sneak one in on you because I wasn't sure what I would find. I was like, well, I'm going to do this sort and see what happens. So I will talk about this last minute edition a little bit later on. So I thought it would be good to start with just a couple notes from the state superintendent and the president of the State Board of Education. And both of their comments here really boil down to the fact that the report card really is about an opportunity for districts to celebrate their success and then look for areas of improvement. I was fortunate to meet Mr. DeMaria last year. He spent some time in my previous district. We spent a couple of hours talking. And so we were able to say to him, the report card is so frustrating sometimes. And, he was very genuine in saying, we know it's not a perfect measure, but we hope that you use it to continuously improve what's going on in your district. It should be a point of conversation, and it should be a way for you to have those conversations. So I think you really see that encapsulated in these quotes here. They always give a letter or write a letter that goes out with the state report card. Before we get into a lot of the data, I do just want to tell you this will be a 30,000-foot view tonight. We are looking at the district level data, not a lot of the building things. You please feel free to stop us at any time if you have questions, because I will get into this and eventually I'll take a breath. So just stop me. Let's go ahead and start with looking at the summary of overall districts, and this is from the state perspective. So we have 608 districts in the state of Ohio, and you can see here that they've provided us with this table that shows us exactly how the grades are distributed throughout the state. So the majority of school districts in the state of Ohio earned an overall rating of a C. if you look at the overview of the grade distributions in Butler County, you can see that it very much mirrors that state trend as well. That top line in the table shows the overall grade of the districts, and you can see that 50% of the districts in Butler County received a C on their report card. So as we talk tonight in our presentation, you will hear both Mrs. Thompson and myself refer to our similar districts. So ODE really urges districts, when the report card comes out, to not compare yourselves to people in your athletic conference, to your geographic neighbors. So they have provided us with a similar district methodology that allows us to go in onto ODE's website, find our district, and then it will populate for us our most similar districts. And some of those criteria that they use include the number of students you have, the percent of poverty you have. It will look at household income, how many people have college degrees in the area, is it urban, is it more agricultural? So, they're trying to kind of aggregate all of that data and give us districts that are truly a little bit more like us. And that is where we are going to focus tonight through our presentation. So, Fairfield received an overall district grade of a C. The overall district grades are comprised of achievement, progress, graduation rate, gap closing, the K-3 literacy score, and also the prepared for success score. And each one carries a slightly different weight in the calculation, but you can see there how those are distributed, and that we ended up with a C. And here we are with our similar district comparison. You can see that pretty much every district that was like us in the state also received a C as their overall grade on their report card. In regards to achievement, and remember that the achievement component represents the number of students who passed the state tests. So that was the number of indicators met, which we had 4 indicators met this year in Fairfield, and then how well they performed on them. And that's captured in the performance index. So you can see over here, having only met 4 indicators this year, we did receive an F in that category. But the performance index of 72.1 was a slight increase over last year, and we earned a C, which gave us an overall component grade of a D for achievement. And like most other districts like us, you can see that many received an F and indicators met. I think we're all still trying to get to that 80% benchmark, and making incremental progress each year, but not quite getting there. In terms of the overall achievement component grade, you can also see that many of the other districts did earn a D as well in that category. So what are we doing? I think that's the real question here. We can talk about this data, but like the superintendent and the State Board of Education president wanted us to do, what are we doing to get better in each of these components? And in regards to the achievement component, I think it's important to point out that, in the beginning of August, we pulled together all of our BLTs, and this was how they kicked off their year. So we met over at the high school, and they went through a process to kind of guide them through their building level data. Now, we didn't have the report card yet, but they used last year's data, they used MAP data, they used whatever data they had in front of them, and we broke off into schools, and they went and really looked at the data so that they could understand, where they should kind of place their emphasis for this school year in their building plans. That was the building leadership team, so you just had a handful of people from each building. So in August 30th, Professional Learning Day that we had here, many of the principals used that time to have their teachers all come together around data. and they did data digs in their buildings so that the teachers could really see and understand where their gaps were for their students. And then finally, something that we have planned coming up is to actually go out and visit those buildings. Mr. Smith, Mrs. Pospischel, and myself will be going into the buildings, meeting with the principals, and having discussions about what are you seeing in your data? What do your building plans look like for the year? So we're hoping that being very strategic and very focused in our efforts will help to improve our scores on some of these individual indicators, and then hopefully improve how the students are scoring on the test to really look at how many kids are proficient, accelerated, advanced, et cetera. So that will be interesting. I'm going to turn it over to Mrs. Thompson for the next few minutes.
All right, I am interested to talk to you about the progress measure. Progress is something that measures the growth of our students. We know that not all of our students come to us at the same place on their learning path. So one first grader looks different than another first grader. One 10th grader looks different than another 10th grader. But despite where they come to us, all students should be able to show growth throughout the school year. And that's what this measure talks about. The progress measure looks closely at the growth of all students they're making based on their past performance. And we specifically look at all of our students overall, our gifted students, the lowest 20% of our students in achievement, and our students with disabilities. So it's important to note here that a score of C would be a group of students that's making expected progress. So they're making a year's worth of growth. So our score of a B shows that overall in this area, our students are making more than a year's worth of growth. Now they further break this down. So overall, our students as a whole got that C. Our gifted students, however, showed significantly more progress, so they have a score of an A in that area. Our lowest 20% in achievement had an overall score of an A, and we are proud that that has increased from last year's score from a B to an A. And this is one that we're very proud of. Our students with disabilities this year showed a year's worth of growth. They got a C, and that is up from an F from last year. So we've worked very hard in that area, and we're proud of that. If you take a look at our similar districts, you'll see that we pretty much fell in line. We are ahead of some of our like schools, similar districts, and then there was one school that did get that A that we're going after. So what are we doing in terms of gap closing? Gap closing shows how well they're meeting performance expectations with our most vulnerable populations of students. And they're specifically looking at students in English language arts, in math, in their graduation, and students with their English language proficiency, so our EL students. So the gap closing is going to compare Fairfield students with the state averages in those different areas to see if a gap exists. And again, we are pleased that we have a B in that area. We are up just slightly from last year. We did have a B last year, but our percentage has increased from last year. And again, you can see if we compare ourselves to our similar districts, we are the same as most of the districts. We did have one score lower or one score higher in our similar district category, but most of them did score B. So both the progress and the gap closing make sure that we know where our students are and what our student groups are so that we know how best to help them. Fairfield is continuously focusing on providing high-quality core instruction to all of our students, as well as providing interventions for our students who are struggling and enrichment for our students that are excelling. And this school year, we are going to continue to focus on those students with disabilities, and we have already gotten some meetings in place to talk about our expansion of some inclusion for our students with disabilities. K-3 literacy is the next component that I'd like to talk about. This one's near and dear to my heart, and this one hurts just a little bit. We do have an overall score of a D in this area. This one is a pretty complicated measure. This is attempting to measure the literacy foundation of our K-3 students, and we know how important it is to have a strong foundation in reading because that can predict how well students do in future years. So what the state asks us to do is to give students a diagnostic assessment in the fall of every school year. The assessment that we use in Fairfield is NWEA's MAP assessment. And based on how students do there, we will, I'm sorry, I think I went ahead. Based on how students do on the MAP assessment, they will either be on track or not on track in the area of reading. And students that are not on track are put on a reading improvement and monitoring plan. And that is simply a way for us to say this student needs more assistance in this foundational skill, and we are going to make sure that they receive the supports that they need to be successful. So this measure takes a look at the students that we had 2 years ago and whether the students who were not on track 2 years ago are on track, okay, going into the following grade. So it's kind of old data because it is a little bit behind, but we ultimately need to get all of our students on track. This D is a higher percentage of a D than what we have had in the past. We're moving in the right direction, but we still feel like we have some work to go. We are proud of the fact that at the end of this component, you have that third grade reading guarantee assessment, and we were able to promote 99.2% of our third graders on to fourth grade. So that means that they met threshold for promotion, those eligible students. So if we take a look at our similar districts in this area, you can see that there are several Ds and several Cs in this area. What are we doing to improve here? So we have already met with our state support team representative to discuss different strategies that we can use to improve in this area. We have asked her to do some investigating of what some other schools might be doing. We're also analyzing our local assessment practices to assure that there isn't a root cause that we can identify to help improve the score. We have raised our local cut score for placing students on a RIMP, especially in third grade, because one of the measures here that comprises this component is that you get a deduction if a student isn't on a RIMP and is still continuing to struggle. And we continue to use our student data to inform our interventions. And one thing that we are interested in following closely this year is that we expanded our kindergarten intervention program. We have this program at Central and at Compass, and this year East has done a slightly modified program, but they are extending the school day for approximately 15 students and keeping those students another hour to an hour and a half. And these are our most struggling students, to provide them with that extra time to get a good solid foundation under that.
So our final two components tonight are graduation rate and prepared for success. So the graduation rate, of course, looks at the percentage of students who are successful finishing high school in 4 years, and then we have another cohort that we're following that finishes in 5 years. In both of those categories, Fairfield received a B. So so close to an A, but not quite there. So some of that has to do with some new state rules around, who is eligible for graduation, whether or not they count, those types of things. You can see in terms of similar districts, most have A's and B's in graduation. It seems to be something that, throughout the state of Ohio, most districts are doing pretty well on that component. What makes that difficult for a lot of districts is that they're doing really well in their graduation rate, and then you look at their prepared for success measure and you're like, what happened? How can we have an A or a B in graduation but a D or an F in prepared for success? And it's just, one of those components, again, that's a little bit frustrating for us because it's not even looking at our most recent cohort of kids. This is actually looking at our kids who would have graduated in 2017 and 2018. So it's always in the rear. Right now, we could actually calculate what our prepared for success grade will be for next year's report card. That's how far in the rear it is. So, but it is supposed to measure whether or not our students are prepared for the workforce or prepared for college, and how well prepared they are. You can see here how much other districts struggle with this. But I can say, I've been really impressed by the leadership at the secondary level because this is something that they really want to improve. And, they've gone out, they've been very proactive in joining a local consortium of other high schools who want to improve preparation for the ACT. They've gone out, they've partnered with a company called Torch Prep, and that local company is going to be providing professional development to 50 of our teachers in November. And we hope to expand that. We're going to meet, and by we, I mean Fairfield Freshman School, the Academy, the high school, myself, Mrs. Postpischel, we're all going to sit down and meet to talk about a more comprehensive plan. We know that even though providing professional development to 50 teachers in November is a great place to start, that if we're really going to make change, it has to be a little bit more systemic, and it has to start at much earlier grade levels. So I'm very excited by the plans that the leadership has in place for that, and I'm looking forward to supporting them through that. One of the other things I'm very interested to see, I think this is a great thing that the board and the leadership decided to do, and that was any student who is enrolled in an AP class will now have the opportunity to take the test. And that's because the district has decided to pay for that test. So the way the prepared for success measure works is you have 3 different ways you can earn a point for your district. So that might be a remediation-free score on the ACT, it can be earning an honors diploma, or earning an industry credential. So of course, we want all of our students to earn those, but any student that earns that point can earn bonus points. So they can earn bonus points by taking CCP classes, they can earn points by scoring or earning a specific score on an IB exam or an AP exam. So I'm very interested to see that with a growing number of students now taking the AP exams, if that will give us a few more points in this category. So I think it's a great thing that you did, to allow all students, to help all students take the test. So Ohio Revised Code requires the state to also provide a number of rankings, and there are always a couple that I go to. One is value added, because that's really talking about growth over time. And then the other one that I typically take a look at is the gifted ranking. So with the value-added rankings this year, I thought it would be, I thought it was interesting, Fairfield held its own pretty much right in the middle of the state. These rankings that are done by the state are a little bit different from the report card data because they include different groups of, or different types of schools. So, for example, the value-added ranking includes public, community, and STEM schools. So that denominator of 847 districts versus the 605 in the beginning is going to be different. So you have Fairfield ranking pretty well, relatively well in the GMC and among similar districts on that ranking. So I think that shows that we're on a good track in terms of growth, which we saw in our progress measure as well. And then finally, the gifted indicator, I went in to see how Fairfield ranked on the gifted indicator, and you can see the denominator here is lower. It's only 568 because schools have to meet a certain threshold in order to be counted in this ranking. So a lot of community schools don't meet the criteria, so they're not included here, but most public districts are. So you have to have at least 10 gifted students identified, and then you have to have a sufficient number of those students taking tests in order to be a part of this ranking. I can talk about that. Anyway, Fairfield, you can see here, did very well against the GMC and also in our similar districts. And I know I've been talking so much about similar district, but it's hard to not just look at it. But this was an exciting finding because, really Fairfield did very well, just a few points behind Sycamore and Mason, and of course did very well in the similar district ranking too. So then, if you can follow my thought here, I go down a rabbit hole sometimes with data, and I did with this because I thought, when I was looking at that list, I didn't see a whole lot of schools from around here at the top of that list. I wonder where Fairfield is, in that list. So what I did was to kind of control myself, I said, okay, you're allowed to look at contiguous districts to Butler County. And I went through and highlighted those, and it turned out that Fairfield was 17th in that cohort that I looked at. And more exciting, they were #1 in Butler County. So they ranked the highest out of all other Butler County schools on their gifted rating. And I think that just says a lot about the work that our teachers are doing, the differentiation that's happening, the work of Mr. Beidelman and his team. So I thought that was a good way to end, right, on a very high note. But we will, if you have any questions, right now is fine, or you can always feel free to call or email if you want.
Any questions? Mrs. Short?
Yes. Thank you so much for putting this together. You guys worked hard on it. It's a lot of data that you have to pour through. I have a couple of questions. One of the questions pertain to K through 3rd literacy. I would like to find out whether or not we've looked at contiguous districts and factoring in Lakota, Mason. Have we looked at the districts that did score higher than we did in our, our neighbors basically? Have we done an assessment as to which ones have all-day kindergarten versus half-day? I think Lakota is moving to all-day kindergarten, so that answers the question for that district. Do you know what Mason offers? Is it all-day or half-day? I don't know. And Sycamore?
I do not, but I am more than happy to look into that.
That would be great. I think that would be good information to have. Also, just kind of staying within that K through 3. I know with the reading centers, what I recall is that there were different levels, different books for kids that were kind of the advanced, the differentiated type learnings. Within our reading centers, are we able to really pull those kids out that we've kind of connected with the data that we know, have those deficits? Are we able to do more in the classroom with them, or do we need to rely on parents a little bit more to chip in? Maybe a little bit more reading at night, maybe those goals. I don't know if it's different types of Lexile goals that we're still looking for those kids, but I'd be interested in
Yes,
that.
our Reach for Reading program does have differentiated materials. So there are leveled readers at a variety of levels for our students in the elementary grades, and that is what is used in the classroom, as well as some pull-out or push-in help from our reading specialist for students that are still struggling. The majority of the students that are getting support from our reading specialist are working on those foundational reading skills. But there are, we differentiate there too. So there are some students that are working on other areas such as vocabulary development or comprehension, things like that. But the majority of them are still working on those foundational skills.
Okay, that's good. I did have another question. This was within Prepare for Success. I completely agree with you. In looking at the data, I mean, we have more current data than what's there. So with all of our kids having the ability to take, all of the AP kids having the ability to take those tests, I do believe that it's going to benefit us just having more peers in that number. I would like to see a little bit more of the data on Prepare for Success part of it as to where we are in, I guess, the 2018, 2019 sort of numbers. How many kids did we have getting at least a 3 on one of their AP exams? If we could look at that data in, conjunction with what's prepared here, I think that would give us, a good indication of where we are. Another thing that I would like to just point out, I noticed that we still don't have a lot of kids taking the SAT. Like, I think that percentage is something like 0.1%, whatever that number is. So is there a benefit for us in pushing the SAT, or should we just, what's the finding on that? Would that help us?
So it's kind of interesting that you bring that up, because Mr. Rice and I actually met around that same thought a couple weeks ago, because when I was digging more into the Prep for Success measure, I noticed that, it was less than 0.5% of students taking the SAT. So, there are a couple of things going on there. Now that the state allows us to give one of those 2 tests in school to all kids, and we're giving the ACT, and, there's still that idea that if you're going to stay local, if you're staying in the Midwest, then you should take the ACT. So I think that's driving the number of kids who are obviously taking the ACT, retaking the ACT, because many of them are staying here. From a scholarship perspective, though, I feel like that's where, you get a little bit of push with that, upper tier group of kids to take the SAT. We don't think that there's a reporting problem. We think we just have that few students taking the SAT. I can say one of the conversations that we started to have last year, and again, I was looking completely different district's data, but what we were finding was that some of our students who were taking the SAT were performing better on the SAT. So the high school principal and I are like, what's going on? Are we choosing the wrong test? But, like I said, I didn't really get to see, we didn't finish that data dig ourselves, but I think it's worth kind of keeping SAT a part of the conversation here in Fairfield.
Because we've got merit scholars that are taking the PSAT. So the translation there seems like it would be there for us. So I I think it would really be a good idea to start encouraging our kids to take it. Maybe it's not for every kid, but
Right.
just based on where we are with our PSAT scores, I have to believe that some of our kids definitely would do better.
I think some of that is, like time and money, right?
Yeah.
That they think, oh, well, I can take it, I'll take the ACT in school and that saves some money, and then, I don't have to take this other test over here and possibly retake it. I think that's just part of our culture right now, that, it's either one or the other, it seems like more than ever.
That's it for me. Thank you.
Any other questions?
Yeah, the most concerning part to me is the K through 3 literacy, as Mrs. Shorter alluded to. So the map testing that we do in the fall each year, we're doing that at all the grade levels. And so we're able, in theory, to identify the most at-risk readers very early on. Whether we're getting them help at the kindergarten level or not, we've at least identified it by first grade. And so then this is a measure of our inability to get them to where they need to be by the time they're third graders?
Actually, it's every grade. So they take kindergarten to first grade. How many students were struggling in kindergarten? Did we get them on track by first grade? How many students were struggling in first grade? Did we get them to on track in second grade? And the same thing from second to third grade. So I have talked to many of our principals, and they are telling me that the students that are entering our kindergartens are coming with some pretty severe deficits to begin with, and so we have a long haul to try to get them to on track. We are pleased that by third grade, we are getting 99.2% of them able to go on to fourth grade, but it's just taking a while to get those skills built for the students.
To that point, we mentioned meeting with our state support team person and, just looking at all of our data, but she specifically brought up the K-3 literacy score as well. And so I think, what we're going to do is she actually has a needs assessment protocol that we can do around this measure. That includes, the assessment piece, interventions, all of those things that we'll be able to look at internally. And then she's also going to help us, connect us with what other districts are doing, because we have some questions about, the diagnostic that we're using in K-1. And so we're having those conversations with our principals and our teachers, and hopefully this particular needs assessment protocol will bring some of those other things to light, because it would be great for us to get into that C range and to know that we're meeting that expected growth.
Absolutely. Great.
Along those same lines, excuse me, with the K through 3 literacy, are they looking at a percentage of children or a number of children, or are they tracking each individual child as they go through the levels?
It is each individual child. So they look at one child who was here all year in kindergarten, and then they track that child to first grade to see if that individual child is on track in first grade. So it's by the individual child.
Okay, do you know, and I apologize if I'm asking just way overthought questions, but do you know if when we get children in from other schools, if that skews our numbers at all?
They have to have been here through the entire period. So if we get a student that comes mid-year, they're not going to be counted in those scores.
Okay, thank you.
Just one other thing.
Please.
Does anybody else have questions?
Yeah, but go ahead.
Okay. I'm just wondering, is it possible for us to think of, an intervention as in, we know how many kids we have coming to our school district. Crazy thing, what if we started sending out some information to parents that, parents of 4-year-olds, just sort of giving them a blueprint of sort of what's expected, or I don't want to say what's expected, because we don't want to unload, all this stuff on parents if they're not prepared for it. But can we start to give some kind of blueprint or something, you know, like a road to early success for parents with 4-year-olds, and because it would be nice if we could get ahead of the curve a little bit, but not be behind the curve. I mean, either be on the curve or ahead of the curve, but we need to have our kindergartners starting at the right place. And if we start hitting those homes of 4-year-olds where we know that there could be an at-risk component, maybe it could be by income level. I'm not sure if we could segregate get the data out in the way that we'd want to have it, but if we start hitting that population before we even get them into the school district with some level of, some rubric, something, I wonder if that would help.
It might. We actually provide something like that at kindergarten registration, but by then
Right,
it's
it's
probably
already-
way
yeah,
too
it's
late.
late.
And we don't have a preschool program for a large percentage of our students. So this might be something that we could work with some of the area daycares and preschools to try to let them know what the expectations are, because I think sometimes when you're not part of seeing what comes next, you don't know what the rigor level is. We've also tossed around some ideas about trying to get books into children's hands at the preschool level. One of the things that we've kind of come up against is how do you accurately find those students? Some might have siblings in the district, but some of them may not. So if you have any ideas about that, I would love to talk to you about it.
I mean, we could work with like Fairfield City. Fairfield City would have these basic statistics, right? I mean, maybe not the township, but just an idea.
Just brainstorming here, I'm wondering if we could somehow partner with the library, the Lane Public Library, for early reading programs for children in the community. I know they have a lot of reading programs. I pass billboards every day that they put up, and I'm wondering if we can maybe talk to them, get a bug in their ear about, hey, what can we do for the younger kids?
Maybe do something in the evening. I think a lot of our parents work during the day, and it might be a hardship to get them someplace during the day, but evenings. Because I actually learned of a program that a neighboring district is doing where they're bringing parents in, having parenting classes, while the preschoolers are having a play date, but it's not really a play date, right? So I think those kinds of programs are very exciting. I would love to entertain something like that.
I just I have a question about the prepared for success. So obviously, you said that we are using data from students that left us in 2017 and 2018. So what measures are out there that are being held against us that we really have no control over? So for instance, how are they being measured 2 years from after they leave us? What are some measures that are affecting our grade?
So I think he's referencing Prepared for Success, for example. Those, as you were saying, that we know, right, we could figure out maybe our letter grade and that particular component for next year fairly early because it's, we're behind schedule, so to speak. And so you're asking kind of,
Yeah, are they surveying students that left us 2 years ago on what they're doing now? Or are they, and that's, if they're not on a particular track, that's being held against us now? Or is it where the subjects they're taking in school, or whether they're still in school, or whether they're in the military? I mean, what
None of that
measures
is
are
being held against us for that component. The difficult thing is that, you put, I'll say interventions, you put supports in place to improve in this particular component, and it takes so long for it to show up in your component score.
Okay.
So that is really why the measure is a little frustrating, because you're not really looking at the kids who just left you.
Okay.
in 2019. But in terms of this particular component and following kids beyond graduation, there isn't anything that's
Okay, great.
measured in that.
I'm happy for that.
Yeah, yeah.
Because it's like, well, once they leave us, how can we control what they do or how life happens to them? Why would that be held against us? So thank you for
Correct.
clearing that up for
I
me.
thought they did actually track if you've actually entered college within 2 years after graduation.
There is another part of that, it might be in that prepared for success component, but yes, it's in the report card where they measure how many students entered college within a certain number of 2 years.
It's like there's a 2-year college
Yeah.
component and a 4-year college component, an in-state
Yeah.
college component, if I remember that correctly.
It could be college costs.
Yeah.
That's the detriment.
Yeah, I mean, if it's no longer affordable for that student and
I
they
think-
leave, that's not,
But in that, in terms of like whether or not it affects our overall component grade, that particular piece of information isn't calculated in there, but it does exist on the report card, and it'll show a percentage.
okay. So you were talking about bonus points that you could earn.
Oh.
And so was that part of those points that we could earn if kids are still in college or no?
No, it's, once they either earn the industry credential or the honors diploma or the remediation-free score, then there are a handful of things, but they're all in the moment. The CCP
Okay.
courses, 3 or better on AP, forget what the IB score is because most people around here don't have international baccalaureate programs, but, so things like that. It does not depend on whether or not they are in college or stay in college.
So but this year's data is based on 2 years, essentially 2 years ago.
Yes.
Thank you. This was a tremendous, comprehensive, presentation, and I've learned more about how report cards are given than ever before. So thank you so very much. This was tremendous.
Thank
I don't want
you.
to speak for everybody else, but
I'd like to add a few comments, if it's okay.
sure.
First of all, I just want to say this discussion, I love this discussion, and listening to Mandy and Jenny speak and listening to your questions and comments. I told Nancy I've already got some ideas over here, and I know Mandy's excited about that. But a couple observations I'd like to make. One, I think the comments at the beginning of the presentation that were shared about, we always say that the report card doesn't define us, but it really is important. And those comments referenced continuous improvement. And that's really what is important for us, is that we just want to continue to get better as a district in terms of how we serve our students and our families, and that's really what this is about. Several times you heard about increases, and that's exciting. I'm not surprised by the fact that we continue to hear, well, we increased here, and we increased in this category and this component, but we didn't increase enough to increase that letter grade. But it's great. It's rewarding for our staff members who work so hard each and every day to know that we are going in the right direction. I'm confident that we will continue to go in the right direction for a few reasons. One, I think we have some veteran leaders that are doing great work. I think we have some great veteran teachers, and we have some high-energy teachers with new ideas, and all of these folks are working together with the same goal, and that's to do what's best for kids. I'm confident for that reason that we will continue to see that growth as long as the state doesn't change the target. And I feel like they have, we're kind of in an era right now where the target, hasn't changed as much as it used to. And I'm hopeful that that target will remain stationary so that we can continue to see those improvements. Like I said, I'm confident that we can do that. And so I just wanted to point that out. I wanted to thank Mandy and Jenny. I know Katie couldn't make it, and I know we have Jen Mott is out here, who's a secondary assistant principal. And, I mentioned, I've got this idea and that's how this works. And I don't have all of the ideas, by the way. A lot of people have a lot of great ideas. But when someone has an idea, we get together and we talk about it and, how can we do this? How can we make this work for kids? And that's really what it's all about. And so I just want to commend them as well for an outstanding presentation. And I'm really excited about our future here because of our people, the people that work here and our kids and our families. So that's all I have.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments?
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.